So first, I want to thank Yeravanen for having me and having the opportunity to present to Armenian. Like, your country is very, very welcoming, so I'm very happy to be here. So first, all opinions are my own, of course. So I will present to you DynoV2. So DynoV2 is a self-supervised learning algorithm used to train computer vision model to basically extract information from images. So this is the first self-supervised model that has been able to beat models trained like CLIP on billions of image and text pairs. And the fact that we use self-supervised learning means that we don't need labels, we don't need annotation. The only thing we need are images, raw images. And from this, we learn we train a model that can understand images and all the properties that they contain. So first, So computer vision, I think you know what I'm talking about. I'm sorry for all the LLM people. I will talk about this. But some of the things that I will talk, especially about data curation, also apply to large language models, speech, whatever. So I think you will still be happy. So computer vision, we know like all the different tasks. Usually what was done was, okay, I am working in a healthcare startup. I want to predict like fractures in bones. I annotate data, and then after that, I train a model in a supervised fashion. I fine-tune it on my labels, and nice, I have a product that can do fracture detection, but my product might not work on other kind of images. It might not work on, let's say I want to do a product on like bone density. It will not work well, so I have to annotate a lot of things to develop and to work fast. It's not the best thing. So this is classical computer vision, but we live in post-ChatGPT era, so we know that now we have LLM, stuff like that. So as a computer vision researcher, the hype has been a little bit stolen. I still remember when this kind of images and videos, like bounding box with like maybe 10 classes, with like bikes and cars was all the hype, and people are like, wow, this is AI, this is the future. But now like people are expecting way more out of AI. They are expecting like production level stuff, not research only. So we know that there are still a lot of useful cases to solve with computer vision, but industrially they need good engineering, but in terms of research, they are not necessarily the most interesting ones. So where are we in computer vision? So as I said, we are, I think, at the level that where we can get good industrial applications solved. But in terms of research, we are still nowhere near the LLM. Like as we know, LLMs have like so many features. They are trained on billions and billions of text tokens. And from a more AGI perspective, like this is a Yann LeCun vision of AGI. Computer vision is only perception. And LLMs, it might be actor, critics, or model, we still don't know. But I don't think we have solved the perception yet. So we still have a lot of interesting things to solve, like AI for science, for example. We have medical imaging, things like that. Things where we can't have unlimited amount of labels. It's very expensive, like you have to pay a doctor to do this. You have to, satellite imagery, you can't annotate the world, basically. And like things in 3D, things like AR, VR, a lot of stuff are needing things where you don't have annotations. So this is where DynoV2 comes. So DynoV2, this is the way we wanted to do vision at Meta. So either you can do, as I said, a specialist model, so you annotate your things, your very specific task, you train your model on it, and it can do this and only this, and it might not be good if you change the distribution of data. So let's say I'm an hospital, I train a model on my data, they come from a device that is from one specific producer, and then I go in another hospital, it might not work. So what we want is a generalist model that can basically do all the tasks at once, but this is expensive. So once you have a generalist model, either you want to fine-tune it, which is usually what people do in computer vision, they fine-tune on data, but what you can also do is freeze it, so you freeze the model and you take the features, the vectors that are extracted from the image, and you train on top of it very small linear layer or very small like neural network. This is way more aligned with what people do with LLMs. So usually LLMs, you do generation and prompting and stuff like that. You don't retrain necessarily the LLM. So this is what we wanted to do. And then we want to use self-supervision because weakly supervised like Clip use billions of image and text pairs. Of course, you don't have billions of like radiology reports and images or satellite imagery. You don't even have labels at all. Or biology, for example. And supervised, it's even worse. So we want a general vision model that we can use as is, don't need to fine-tune it, just a little logistic regression, linear model, a small MLP, and train without supervision. So here are the results. So for example, this is the visualization of what the model understands from the image. So this is the features extracted by the model without any labels and frame by frame. We don't like tell it to look at the entire video, and we can see that even with occlusion, even if it doesn't see like the body of the dog, thing like that, it's still understanding that it's a dog head, dog hair, thing like that. And so it has a good understanding of images at a part level and not just at the image level. It's just saying, oh, this is a dog, this is a trash can, yeah, okay, we don't care. What we want is something more fine-grained, because in real application, in industrial application, what you want is not like to predict what is a trash can and what is a car. You want to predict like very, very specific things, like a defect on your products that might be very, very small, not like that your product will not transform into a dog. So we closed the gap with supervised models. So this is, as I said, the first model, self-supervised model, to get very, very good performances. So in yellow, all the other models in the literature up to even now, I think. In blue, it's DynoV2. And you have flops, so basically we released a different size of model based on your usage, because if you don't have a lot of GPUs, of course, you don't want to use like 1 billion parameter models. If you want to be like online or on edge devices. And we can see that on all those tasks, so classification, segmentation, depth estimation, things like that, we beat all the other models. And we, as I said, we don't use labels at all for the pre-training part. So we use label to evaluate the model, of course, because at the end, the model doesn't know what you want. So you still have to annotate, but you need to annotate less. And for the same amount of annotation, you get better performances. And more than that, I will show you, you get better robustness. So this is me. So how you do this? So usually people think about better modeling and tricks. So this is the research part on the left. But it's not all, like it's not everything, especially in this era of ChatGPT. What you need is faster code base, faster training to iterate, to like train on more images, more data, faster and for longer and cheaper, of course. And what you need, this is 99% of AI. This is not like what people used to tell us before, but basically curating data, having good data is the key of what is making AI work. Even when you don't have annotation. Like text LLMs, they don't have annotation, they still need good data. Like they just predict the next word and they still need good data. So even with self-supervised learning, you need good data. So first, just a quick explanation of how it works, how a model can learn anything without annotation. So basically, this is DynoV2 is a combination of a lot of tricks and two main losses, Dyno and iBot. So Dyno, it's an image level loss, so it means that this is training the model to understand the image, like the whole image. And basically what we have is we don't have annotation, but we still have to have a loss, an error function basically, so it's self-supervised, so the model is creating itself its own annotation. So what's happening is we have a teacher model and a student. So as you know, the teacher teaches the student. So what's happening is at first we initialize them the same randomly. But the only difference is the student is seeing less context, is seeing small crops of the image, so small areas, while the student is seeing the teacher is seeing everything. So the teacher sees all the image. At first, of course, it's randomly initialized, and then it's predicting what we call prototypes. Prototypes are basically like buckets or clusters where it puts the images, and at first it's random, so probably it will look at these dogs. And it will say, okay, it's black and white. I will put it in the bucket black and in the bucket white. And then the student will have to predict those buckets, but with less context. So here, for example, it's only looking at the brown and white dog. So it will put it in the brown and white buckets. It will miss the black one. and it will have to think, okay, I missed, so maybe I have to think about it. Okay, I'm seeing a dog. Usually dogs are maybe together, and you have black dogs. I don't know if it's doing this, but basically it has to think a little bit ahead of the context we gave him. And so it will start to train, get a little bit better. And then what we do is we update the teacher with the average of all students. So what's happening is basically the student is becoming a little bit better, and then the teacher is the average of better students, so he's becoming even better. And because the teacher has more context, it's harder for the student to match the teacher, so it has to increase its knowledge, and we do that iteratively up until, for example, at the end, the teacher will see the dog. It will put the thing in like the tail bucket, the ears, dog ears bucket, the dog paw buckets, things like that. Like maybe the chair, you have the chair bucket, and then the student will see maybe this dog, but not the paw, or maybe not the ears, or maybe not the chair, and it will have to think, oh, I'm seeing this, what is it? It's probably a chair, so it's putting it in the chair bucket, and it's doing this without annotation. So I'm talking about chair buckets and things like that, but basically the prototypes are automatically designed by gradient descent, so we don't have to tell them anything. We just have to find this nice like loop, feedback loop that improves the knowledge. So this is at the image level, but now what we want and what is nice with self-supervision is that we can get good dense features. So basically, as I shown, like the dog running, the features were at the pixel level, like you have patches, and the features were at the patches level. This is something you can't get with, let's say, Clip. Clip is trained using text captions and images, but as you know, describing an image is very, very complicated. Like if I was to describe this scene, I would say I will not be able to describe each of you individually, your position, your height, like all the different objects, the thing like that. Yet we train image model with captions like that are one sentence long, so they can't describe everything. With self-supervision, we can get dense features. How do we do that? So as I said, we keep the same student and teachers backbone, but what we do is we mask part of the image in the students, and we ask him to predict from those masked areas. We want to predict the prototype that the areas that the teacher is seeing are actually. So let's say here, you see you have like the start of the dog head. It will have to predict the dog body here. So it's predicting the prototype black and white dog body, like all the buckets, and it's training to increase the performances at the local level. So this is the two main losses. This just works, it's working well, but it's still not state of the art, still not like production ready, I want to say, like for shipping like a research paper. So what we did is a lot of small tricks that helped. So first, we did a resolution adaptation. So basically, of course, training a model, especially the 1 billion model we train, it's very expensive. We train on 140 million images, and so it's taking a lot of time. So what we did is, okay, we want a model that can ingest higher resolution images, because high resolution means better features at the end and better performances, but it's way more compute intensive. It's like, I think, 4 or 6 times more compute intensive. So what we did is we looked, okay, what if we train for small resolution for 90% of training, and then at the end we just train a little bit on high resolution. And you can look here, the blue curve is when we do our setup, and it's matching nearly the more expensive setup of training on high resolution, which means that you can basically reduce cost by a lot by doing so, while keeping like 90% of performances. What we do also is like we train first a very, very big model, 1 billion parameter, but then 1 billion parameter is not necessarily useful, because in production, like when you want to do inference, and even for smaller research groups, you want to like have smaller models. So what we could have done is use the same loss to train smaller models. But we have a big one, and we have in our loss, you know that we have a teacher. So what we did is we took the big model and we use it as a frozen teacher. So basically, the teacher is not updated anymore, but he is very good, he's very big, and the student is a very small model. And what you get is basically you can distill the big model inside smaller architectures, which means that if you have a lot of compute for training, but then on inference you want to be effective, you don't have to train effective model and use them in production. What you can do is you can train a very big one, distill it in smaller model and get better performances for the cost of a small model. So we do this for the smaller model. We also do register tokens, so small primer on attention maps. So I don't know if everybody knows transformers and vision transformers more specifically, but basically you have your image split in patches. Those are the colorful thing like on the dog running. Each pixel that you saw, like the color pixel, were a patch. And basically you have your transformer on top of it, and patches are doing self-attention on top of on each of them. So they are looking at each other. And we also have the class token, which is the image level representation, basically the thing that helps get us image level representation. So this is how Vision Transformer works. And if you look at the way each token is looking at each other token, each visual token, each patches, you can see that those are supervised model, those are clip model, and this is Dino V1 and Dino V2. And you can see that Dino V1, what was one of the good thing about it was like it was looking at the interesting part of the input. Like if you looked at the attention maps, you were seeing basically the interesting part, like there the beetle, the objects. For the other one, you got a lot of noisy artifacts. And it was nice with Dino V1. It was one of the use cases of Dino V1 was to do masks, like you could remove the background basically, but with Dino V2 we get back the artifacts, which is not very nice. And I think it's a little bit similar with, if you were there yesterday, with AlphaFold V2 versus V3, is sometimes you lose some properties of your model that were nice, and there we lost the properties to have nice and sharp features, and actually those artifacts are reducing the performances of dense tasks like segmentation, depth. So what's happening is what we did is we added register token on top of the class token. So basically those tokens are not used in the loss. They're just there as free compute for the model. But basically what's happening is those artifacts are moved from the patch token into the register tokens. So we remove the artifacts, we improve the performances on segmentation, depth estimation, and we get so you can see with 0 register we have artifacts, and when we add even 1 register, it's absorbing the bias basically, and we get back with nice scripts features that we can use after that for segmentation, things like that. So as I said, Dino, it's a lot of little tricks on top of each other, which at the end makes the model work. But the tricks alone and the loss is not what is like, it's not enough. What you have to do is actually scale up the data and the model. Of course, to scale the model, you need more data. And to get more data, you can just scrap internet, get billions of images and train on it. But it's not effective because internet, it's a lot of crap. You have a lot of screenshots, things like you don't want, things that are useless. And also, if you train on it, it's inefficient. To get good, if you want to see like a very specific thing in internet, you will have to train on billions of images, and it will take a lot of compute, a lot of time. So basically, what we did is we want to scale data. Scaling data is not easy, so we have team at Meta tried to increase the number of data, so 17 times the number of parameters, 1,000 times the number of data, and you get 1.3 points more on ImageNet, which is like useless basically. You wasted a lot of resources for not a lot of outcome, so it's not straightforward. And what we saw is in LLMs, we need data curation. Actually, even Llama and stuff like that, if you look, they are very, very careful curation, Mistral, things like that. You have to like basically find like your secret recipe of how to take and steer all and mix all the data, how much time you need. So you can see that they sample with different rates. First, you have to select from where the data come from. Then you have to sample them with different probability. So it's a lot of difficult things, and it needs labels. So those are labels actually knowing from where they come. And it's not necessarily usable. Clip also filter words, so Clip, the model trained on billion of image and text pair, they also filter their data. So what we did is, okay, we have a bunch of curated data set from the research field. So we know, for example, ImageNet, we have like data sets of like birds, of planes, data sets of like landscape, countries, cars, things like that. So those are the curated data sets. We don't use their labels. We just know the fact that people care about them. We know that people want people to be better on them and to basically solve them. So those are the interesting data we want to solve. It can be like your use case if you are in a startup. It can be your modality if you are in a research group. And we have uncurated data, so data that come either from internet or whatever you have. So what we do is we do an embedding. So you can now you can take DynoV2. We use DynoV1, of course. So we get the features from the images from both clusters. We do deduplication, of course, and then we do retrieval. So basically, we know that those data, the curated data from the data set we have, it can be like your 100 images. You know you have to be good on. We use them to get similar images in the uncurated data. So basically, you are retrieving, like it's retrieve. I think people maybe know retrieval augmented generation. It's a little bit like that. So you know you want to be good on some specific documents. You retrieve documents that look like it, and then you train on it. So basically, we create an augmented data set. So we go from like I think 10 millions to 140 million, so more than 10 times the number of data, and we still get a very, very good proportion of the classes we want, and we are in domain. We are in the domain we want to solve. So this is the way we did curation for DynoV2. It's pretty efficient because you only have to, the embedding part is the most compute intensive one, but you only have to do it once. And now what we do is we dynamically do it as we ingest new data. But it's pretty, you just need, if it's a static database, you just need to do it once. So it took us 2 days on 100 V100, 160 V100, and for more than 2 billion images. So in 2 days, we do this once, and then we can do your own curation. Of course, if you don't have 2 billion images, it's faster, and you don't only do it once. So now, this is something we didn't use in DynoV2, but we are using now, and we published a paper where we show that it's also working on LLMs. So basically, we want to curate the data, but as I said before, you need like the curated data sets to do the retrieval. You need your seed data set, the thing you know you care about, to retrieve your data, which means that you already need to have a little bit of data. It's not necessarily the case. So how to do it in a fully unsupervised manner? So this is your data set, your raw data set. Basically, you have a heavy head, like of things you don't necessarily care, and you have a long tail with maybe all your useful information in the middle and in the tail, your edge case where you want to be good at. And this is wasted compute, but even more, it's wasted parameter space. Basically, your model will have to be bigger to capture this, and you will waste a lot of compute, time, and money. And this is what we want. We want basically to cut the head to have a nearly uniform proportion and to train equally on every use case. So what we do is we created a method where you do hierarchical k-means. So basically you do clustering using DynoV2. You cluster, then you cluster the clusters, and you cluster the cluster of the clusters, and you do that, and then you sample them equally. And by sampling them equally, basically we theoretically show that if this is your data, you can see here like the distribution gap, and you want all the little dots around that are maybe your edge case, and there maybe if you take internet text, for example, it will be like random like chat from people that you don't necessarily care. So what's happening is with the first k-means, you see you follow the distribution, but the more you go, the more it's evenly distributed. So this helps on LLMs. This helps also on images, of course. And we tested it on remote sensing, LLM, biology. So this is a nice way. You don't need labels. You don't need seed datasets. Now, optimization. So I will not delve too much into this, but basically having an optimized code base is the best thing you can do at first, because you can iterate faster. It's costing less. You can have use less GPUs or bigger batch size. So those are all the tricks. We have more that we use, but basically FSDP, better CUDA kernels. We use like manual GPU synchronization. We check at the basically the giver of all the gradient. We have cached data loading. Efficient data loading is important. For example, nested image forwarding. So basically, we forward multiple images at once, even if they have different size. All those kind of things. At the end, it's like making you way more efficient, and you can scale way better. So if you want to have more detail, we can discuss a little bit. I will not go too much. I think there is a FSDP presentation this afternoon. So experiments. So the results, basically, as I said, we are good in classification. So in red, it's the clip model, so trained with annotation. In yellow, the other model trained without. And in blue, it's our models based on flops, so the compute size. And we can see that we reach or get above the model that use annotation, but our method doesn't need annotation. You can do it on other kind of modalities as well. Also, as I said, so you can't have text description about everything in the image. You can't describe like all the little details. Like if you are a poet, maybe 3 sentences is enough to describe the landscape. But if you want to train good vision model, you need like a lot more details. And you can see that if you train your model using text annotation, you get noisy feature maps. And it's way better with DynoV2. And even worse, you can't get depth with text. You can't explain depth. You can't say, oh, this is like maybe 3 meters away, and then this one is relatively closer, and stuff like that. With DynoV2, so it's a little bit blurry, I think it's the presentation, but it's way crispier in the paper. But basically, with self-supervision, you can learn properties of the image that you will never be able to get from the text annotation. We are also very, very good in retrieval-based. So basically, you can see this is clip. Those are the other self-supervised method, and look at the numbers. So retrieval, basically searching in the database. So we are good at retrieval, and we do retrieval-based data curation. So it's a good feedback loop. And this can be used, for example, if you want to search products in your image database using image or a similar thing. It can also be used, as I said, for data curation. It can also be used at the patch level. So here we are matching patches. So the thing is, the model has been trained on so many images, it can generalize between domain and between objects position. So this is an elephant standing up. This is like a statue of an elephant. This is a drawing of a T-Rex. And this is a dead T-Rex, I don't know. Plane and bird, thing like that. So if you look closely, it's matching like the point of the tails to the point of the tails, the wings. It's matching the horse and the pretty bad drawing of the horse. Thing like that. So the model has been trained on so many images that it becomes robust to the domain. It becomes like a better version of what you could get if you have annotation. Of course, you can annotate, let's say, your horses, but then your user or the people who will use it, they will put this in your system, and you will not have good results. So having the possibility to train on so many data helps with this. So, because we are better on robustness and we do dense tasks, we can actually train. So the depth is hard to see there, but the depth module has been trained using real images from like the real world. And if you apply it on a painting, you still get the depth. Same thing with segmentation. So the model is more robust to new domains. So now I will talk a little. So this was DynoV2. So this is the leading model in terms of pure image model. In terms of classical computer vision, so the thing I showed you, like dogs, houses, like cars, things like that. But we have also 2 other applications of it, two papers. One on forest, so one on tree height estimation, so satellite imagery, and one on medical imaging. So the first one, what we wanted to do is say, okay, our model is good at predicting depth, which is something that we wanted to do for actually canopy height estimation, so basically measuring the height of the trees from satellite imagery. This is very important because you can monitor ecological landscape. You can also compute the amount of captured carbon you have in a specific area. You can do a lot of things like monitor fire, like what the fire burn actually, things like that, the age of the trees. And so we wanted to do that. on like satellite imagery. Of course, satellite imagery, we don't have annotation of the tree height. Nobody is like going in the sky and looking at the trees with a laser. So we have this kind of images, and we want to predict at the 50 centimeter resolution the height of each tree. So this is what our model gets at the end. This is what we get. So the ground truth basically is given thanks to LiDAR. Basically, they land a plane, they do zigzag on top of the trees with a LiDAR, they take pictures, and this is the ground truth. And so it's very expensive, it's small scale, but you get data. So thanks to the LiDAR, you get annotated data, but a very, very, very small amount. But what you want is not to use image from planes, because those data comes from image from planes. What you want is image from satellite imagery. So way cheaper. So what you do is basically you train Dino on those kind of data, satellite imagery, because it's infinite and free, like not free, but way cheaper. So you train Dino on this, then we freeze the Dino model and we train on top of it a depth estimation head. So basically a small model that predicts the depth using LiDAR data, spatial imagery. So this is a spatial imagery data. So this is what the plane looks like, and it's different from satellite imagery because, of course, the plane is below the cloud. The plane also has maybe a different angle. The plane is also only during the day, not in the evening or the late in the afternoon. So you have a distribution shift, but because you can train on so many satellite imagery, as I said, the models are more robust. You can train your model on satellite imagery, train your depth estimation on plane data, and then go back and do the prediction on satellite imagery. And so this is what we have done. So this is the image we train the Dino model. Then we run our meta, on the meta infrastructure, we run our model, and we run it on the whole world, including Armenia, of course, at the 50 centimeter scale. And this is available freely also, both the model, the code, and the map. And this is what we got. So this is the height at 50 centimeter scale of all the trees in the world. So this is one application where Dino V2 is really useful because you want to be robust not only to the plane versus satellite imagery data, you also want to be robust based on the country you are. Like, of course, Armenian trees, they will not be the same as in Amazonia, they'll not be the same as in France or in like redwood trees. So of course the model will not be good everywhere, like redwoods, you know, like the 100-meter trees, it will not be good because it has never seen such trees. But the more you train on unsupervisedly using Dino V2, the better you can get with the sparse and the limited amount of data we have. So this is nice, it's scaling well, and we are now using the data curation I told you, because if you sample randomly, you will find a lot of water, of course. You will find a lot of Amazonian trees, but Armenia, it's pretty small, so of course you will get only a few amount of data. If you do the data curation I talked to you about before, the hierarchical k-means, you can basically sample more equally from the world and get better distribution from everywhere. Also, because you train one backbone unsupervisedly, the backbone can do multiple things. It's not supervised, so it can do a lot of things. So now we have a backbone, we don't need to train it anymore. We can just train a new head. Instead of predicting depth, we can predict the counting the trees. So this is very good, and you can see that at the 50 centimeter scale, it's working well. And this, we don't need to train the big model. We just need to have some annotation and train the small head. So it allows us to like iterate fastly and to also see what's feasible and how much data we need to get the performances we want. So this is very nice. The second application I will talk about is a more medical one. So basically, we train a model on chest X-rays, so X-rays of the lungs, heart, and like the ribs. So basically, what we do is we have data, a lot of different data sets actually. So some people annotated maybe the vertebra, some people annotated one specific disease, people annotated, I don't know, heart disease, for example. Oh. Oh, if you have question.
May I ask one question?
Yeah.
How regression tokens help to get better accuracy?
So it's helping mostly for the dense tasks, so basically depth, segmentation, retrieval based on patches, and it helps, so it's nearly free. Basically during training it's like maybe 0.1% more compute, but at the end you get like 1 or 2% more, 1 or 2 MIOU more than without the register tokens. Also you get better properties of the features, like the norm of the tokens is better. So at the end, it's easier to train on top of the model.
What is the difference between regressor token and CLS token?
So the CLS token is actually used in the loss. So I talked about the Dino loss, you know, the one at the image level, the prototype at the image level. So this is using the representation of the CLS token. So the CLS token is pulling information from all the image, while the patch token are pulling information only on the pixel they are looking at, and the register token, they are just there to be used as a kind of a memory or compute token.
And one more question, how we pre-train the Dino Vito? What are the input and target?
So the input are images from internet that we created, and the output, as I said, is so the output of the model used after the training is just feature vectors, one vector for the whole image and one vector for each patch. But during the training, the output is the prototype, like the bucket I talked about. So basically, it's like you have clusters, it's outputting clusters. You don't know what they mean, but this is what they output during training, and you remove just the prototype thing at the end. And the teacher is predicting prototype with more context, so the student has a harder time to predict the same, and this is how it trains.
Can you bring one real-world example of that input and target?
What do you mean, like how to use it, or during training, how to use it?
During training.
So, like, let's say you have an image of the dogs, and the output is a vector of 128,000 dimension, and the sum is 1. It's a probability distribution of size 100 to like 100,000.
Thanks.
But you don't use the 100,000 clusters at the end. You cut it and you just use vectors, so features vectors, and then from this you can build your application on top of it. So basically, I will talk about medical imaging. It's the same model that does everything all at once. So you have the model extracting features, and then you have a lot of small linear regression, MLP, dense predictor that do all the different tasks with one forward.
You were talking about enriching your data set. So what you are doing, you are taking like a huge pool of photos and making like deduplications, looking for similar ones, and enriching your data set from, let's say, 1 million to 140 million. What's your kind of intuition, like how you play with the level of the duplication, like the level of similarity, how you understand like where to stop, yeah?
So basically you have to look at it. Like people I know in Mistral, in Llama, here, you have to look at the data. Basically, like it's the first step, I think, of building good AI is look at the data, look at your use case, see if it's matching. And while we were doing this, basically, well, it's easier with image because it's very visual, but you take your key image, like the seed image from your nice data set, you look at what you retrieve, and you say, okay, this kind of image I want to train on them, and this one I don't want to. And the duplication, you can see it easily because if you have the same image and you retrieve it, you will see it multiple times. So sometimes it's good to be hard on the duplication because you don't want to train, like to waste compute on the same thing. Sometimes, especially because the duplication is also based on some heuristics. If heuristics is not good at deduplicating your specific tasks, let's say you are doing legal documents analysis and having a no or yes, like it's not or it's something, is very, very different But if you do bad deduplication, you will remove one of the two, and you will lose some context. So it depends. I think you have to look at it.
Actually, I regard what you said, like when the scale is like comes to like 100 million, like.
So when we stop, basically. Okay. So basically, the thing is, we have a lot of compute, but not infinite. We also have a fixed amount of time, and we want to iterate quickly. So basically, you have to find a sweet spot where you start to plateau in terms of performances, and where your compute is still it's still feasible to basically tuning hyperparameters is very important. So you have to be able to do a lot of trainings. So you want to be in the sweet spot. So sometimes adding more data is easier than tuning hyperparameters. But when it's starting to decrease and tuning the things, like understanding the mechanics of your training becomes more useful, you have to stop the data and start doing the modeling part.
So like just to sum up, you are like up to some point looking at your data with eyes, and then just looking at the results with this extra data and see like whether you are saturating or not.
Yeah, exactly. So we test the model on our tasks or downstream task, and if we get better performances, we say okay, nice, and if we don't, we say maybe we should do something else.
So have you tried using DynoV2 for like very specific things like defects in rails or metals like this, and how robust do you think it will be?
So not exactly on defects, but we are. I will present this on medical imaging, where we have very specific different diseases that change based on shape, texture, like size, things like that, and it's capturing very small details actually. I've seen people doing outlier detection with DynoV2, but we don't. In our team, we don't work on it directly. But
and you are like doing buckets, like, and it's self-supervised. So how does it recognize something that is actually maybe not even have a bucket for it?
So that's why we have 100,000 buckets. And also, as I said, the buckets not necessarily represent one class. Maybe a combination of buckets represents something, and a different combination represents something else. So, so at the end, like the space is in the 100,000 dimension, the bucket space, so pretty big, and you have one bucket per patch, and one bucket for the whole image, so it's pretty big. So you have.
Can you control it somehow after fine-tuning?
So the buckets, they are used mainly to get better performances, and after that you get a fixed vector, which is, I think, for classical dyno in the 1000 dimension. But this vector is very, like, we use it with cosine similarity to do retrieval, and it's very effective. So what you can control is, if you have annotation, you can control what you want to search. If you are only doing like nearest neighbor, you can't control everything. So for example, for defects, maybe the model will focus on the defect, maybe it will focus on the lightning condition. So you have to make sure to normalize based on this. But if you have annotation, there the model can become invariant to the thing it doesn't need, like brightness, the position of the object, and you don't need, like, on medical imaging, some of the tasks are like 500 annotated data, and it's very difficult, like scoliosis angle prediction, and with 500 data you get very good accuracy. So it depends of your task, of course, but it can help you bootstrap basically your cold start if you want to try a new project.
Thank you.
Okay, so one more small thing. So you mentioned in DynoV2 you took that application and then you did retrieval from the high quality data sets.
Yeah.
So did you try without that retrieval part? Like if you did only the duplication, I think you covered it in the next paper. But
so we have some ablation in both papers. So also you can find all the papers in my Google Scholar. I don't have much paper, so it's easy to find them. And only the register token is from Timothée Darcey if you want to find it, but all the other one you can find on my Scholar. So basically, what Laurent is asking is, do we do the ablation of comparing based on training on the whole uncurated data and the curated data? And yes, we do it in both DynoV2 dataset and the paper, and the paper about hierarchical clustering. And so basically training on everything is bad because, as I said, the model is capturing all factors of variation. It's trying to extract the most amount of features from the image. And if you have, like, let's say, images that are useless, it will use a lot of parameters in the model to extract information. So basically, internet, I think, from what I've looked at, 80% is screenshots of, like, Windows and Linux terminal. We don't need computer vision to solve Linux terminal. Like, I don't think so. So like, if you look at it, it's normal that the uncurated data is bad and you get worse results. And we tested it also with text. So of course, training on uncurated text is worse than training with the hierarchical clustering. So we used it with quite a basic retrieval model for text. But the better the retrieval model, as I said, for legal document, of course, if you have a specific retrieval model, the curation will be even better. But yeah, we have this kind of ablation.
Before you go to medical data, so the satellite model, the pre-trained one, not the canopy one, just the one that trained on satellite image, is it available?
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah.
We didn't see it.
So, okay, maybe we didn't do enough communication, but it's mainly trained on trees, so you have buildings too. So I don't know the performances on other tasks, but yeah, it's available. And
thank you. Okay.
You're
Let's
welcome.
go on.
So just let me finish on this and we can go back to question if you have some time. So basically what we want is a model that, so as I said, we have a lot of data sets with different annotation. They're all small. And if you concatenate them with supervised learning, we'll not learn anything because on one data set, people will be labeled with cancer or not, on the other one with fracture or not. But if someone has a fracture and a cancer, the model will not be able to do both. It will look, oh, this comes from this data set, I have to predict cancer or not, but I don't care about fractures, and the same in the other one. So supervised learning, you can't concatenate all your annotated data set if the annotation doesn't overlap. And so this is an issue, and also the thing is, you want a good model everywhere because you don't have only one task, you have multiple tasks, and you want to be robust. Like you want so we test robustness. So most of the annotation come from the US, but you know the US, they have different kind of devices, different diseases, things like that, different proportion of disease also. So this robustness is very important. Rare disease, of course, is important, and if you do supervised learning, you might miss them a lot. And you can have like things like scoliosis, exam are not in the training data. So a lot of things, and everything is solved with one model, one DynoV2 model, train. So we pre-train it without labels, and then we train a lot of very small linear or two-layer MLP models on top of it. So you do one forward, and then you can do whatever thing, train on the very small data sets, and it's working better. So we train on nearly 1 million images from 8 countries, 4 continents, and we evaluate using more than 200 different labels, and we have external validation, so training on some data set and testing from other countries, basically. So we are good on classification, so we compare against the state-of-the-art model trained supervisedly on hundreds of thousands of images by teams of like 10 or 20 people. So we are comparing a model that have like 99% of its parameters trained without annotation and 1% trained with annotation against model of the same size trained with everything fine-tuned. And what we can see is on common disease, of course, you have more labels, so fine-tuning, you reach the same performances, but the less labels, the bigger the gap. So basically, as I said, pre-training on self-supervised manner helps on rare case where you have less labels. We have also good segmentation. So this is the ground truth. This is the prediction. And this has been trained using synthetic data. Basically, the segmentation has been obtained using CT scans. So you know 3D CT scans. It's easy to segment in 3D the organs, and then you project them in 2D. But the projection doesn't look like at all, like it looks like, of course, for commoners as a normal chest X-rays, but for a doctor, it doesn't look like real X-rays. So basically what you have, it's the same thing with the satellite imagery. You have a DynoV2 model trained on a lot of real chest X-rays, and then the small segmentation module is trained on synthetic data, and then we do prediction on real-world chest X-rays. And there also, it's way better. So we have good classification, good segmentation, the model is frozen, and this is only possible because we have 99% of the parameters who are frozen. It's only possible to get good attention map explainability. So as I said, the classification is trained on not a lot of data. I think we have 1,000 images with this kind of disease, very rare, less than 1,000, sorry. And so what we do is we take the feature of the DynoV2 model, we train a 2-layer MLP with attention map. So basically the model is picking which patch is necessary for the prediction. So this is actually the way the model is looking at the image. It's not a post hoc analysis of how it's doing. It's not grad cam, if you know about it. So it's not a way to analyze after the prediction. It's exactly where the model is looking at. So it's explainable. Not all is explained, only the localization, of course, but it's matching the position of the reports from the doctors. So here is a more simple example. So this is the ground truth disease. This is if you train with pixel labels. So of course, if you have pixel annotation, of course you will have good accuracy because the model is pre-trained on so many data and you have labels, so it's good. But this is trained, so the model is looking here and here. You can see where it's looking at, and it's trained only at the image level label. So basically here you need pixel level. Here you just need to know this guy has a disease, this guy doesn't. And the model has to choose where to look, and it's choosing the nice position, and this is only possible because we use DynoV2. DynoV2 has good localization, and the model is frozen. So this is something very nice. So all the models are available. The Dyno model, the DynoV2 code base and models are fully open source, APH2 license, so it means you can use them to make money in your startup or whatever. You don't have to mind about the license. The papers, all the things I talked about are in papers, they are available online. The satellite image model, the map is available, and I'm working with a legal team to make available also the health model. So thanks for your attention.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. I would like to ask about your strategy around K-means. So I think it was after retrieval that you're doing K-means, and on top of the K-means another. So when do you decide? Yeah.
Oh.
I think you've passed.
Right.
Yes. So when do you decide, okay, this is enough number of clusters for the first and let's go to the second? Is it the elbow method?
So I think I can show you how we do this. This is how we just check. Like we do it, we test random thing, and we see if it's better or not. Like I don't think there is a good way of telling before. And if you need more labels or more clusters, basically, it's hard to, because we are working at the billion scale, it's very hard to, so with this one it's easy to look at what you are curating because you have a seed and you can look at what you are taking, basically, at the end. But with this one, you don't have the seed, you don't know exactly what is needed, so at the end, 3 levels was the best in most scenarios for LLM, but how many clusters? I want to say, take the default. So the code for this is available also online. Sorry. The code for this is available online, so but you can check, test the default parameter. I don't think there is a rule for picking the good parameters.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. In any case, there is a round, so you can ask your questions later. Now it's time to move to the next sections. Thanks again.